1985 was to have been the 12th annual Stonehenge People's Free Festival, but for a High Court injunction on behalf of the owners of the land, English Heritage. Undeterred, a peace convoy of about 500 travellers and their vehicles tried to seize the land adjoining the monument for a month-long festival. 15,000 police officers and 2 companies of troops stopped them. To understand why people were so intent on squatting the land, we have to go back to Phil Russell, as Wally Dean explains.
Hello, I'm Wally Dean, current caretaker of Wally Hope's ash box. The box of which contained the ashes of Wally Hope, the originator of the Stonehenge Free Festivals, used it in 1976 to spread his ashes at the Stones. A sad story, which I know you've gone into before. So this is the box. The Union Wally, which is the flag he flew under, which is just like our British flag, but with a great big smile in the middle of it. He'd been involved with some of the free festivals over at Windsor, and in 1973 he saw people hassling chip vans and other traders, ice cream men and that, for a cut. They all, demanding money for the festival, and it all got a bit out of hand, and it ended up with a hot dog van being set on fire, which, Wally thought that was totally against the People's Free Festival ethic, that people, should be able to come, whatever they came there for, whether it be to make money selling ice creams or, hot food or whatever. He thought that it was everybody's festival, and those were as much free people as any of the people at the festival. And so he sort of dreamed of a purer festival where money became not an issue, where everything, wherever possible, could be free. That's why one of his slogans was "Bring what you expect to find," a slogan that was picked up by almost all the free festivals, and until their sad demise, or at least more return to the underground. The free party scene is now what's left of the free festival circuit. Has killed the ethos of the free festival, which was people coming together and living together communally, feeding and caring for each other, and looking after each other. Now everyone's looking after number one, and a lot of you find it still in a few small festivals like Cosfest and some of the green gatherings and that's old community feeling, but the Babylon bought the festival. Wally had been going out to Dial House, the house run by the collective who later became Crass. The lady who lived there was G. Vorcher, and she was an artist, and Wally basically talked Penny and G into supporting him, helping him publicise the festival that he planned to hold over summer solstice in '74. And they produced a couple of, they produced a double-sided broadsheet flyer, and also a large colour print with the face of Jesus from the Turin Shroud on it in a sort of rainbow psychedelic colours, and free Stonehenge, and inviting everyone. He invited people like the Dalai Lama, the Queen, the Pope was invited, the Beatles. Wally was totally convinced that John Lennon was going to come down. I've read some letters from him that he wrote excitedly while he was getting the festival together. And he said, "Oh, it's okay, because I've just spent the last hour doing the Beatles letter, and it's all right, because I've Lennoned up the envelope. He's going to love it. I'm sure he's going to come." He invited all the, in a moment of misogyny, which is quite often shines on through with our Wally, he invited all the stewardesses from British Airways. He figured in some of his writing that the stewardess mentality summed up what he saw as good in women, the looking after and being on beck and call, which is sends a few shudders up the spines of feminists these days. But he invited all the British Airways hostesses. He got Radio Caroline involved as well. He talked to Rhiannon O'Reilly, and he was willing to run adverts on Radio Caroline, the pirate radio station out of the North Sea, and basically he was advertising it as a festival of loving awareness. Loving Awareness was a band that had worked on Radio Caroline, almost like the boat band, and the whole concept was, to be in awareness of love, and to be aware of how much you could love each other, sort of thing. And he coincided it with Wally's Solstice Fest, and so he got quite a few. There's quite a few people who said they heard about it first on Radio Caroline. There was always a gathering. I mean, there's been gatherings at Stonehenge ad infinitum back to when it was built. You know, it wasn't built so that no one could go there. You know, it was built as a gathering place. I mean, one of the theories I like about Stonehenge is that different trilithons were put up by different tribes, and this was a sort of central land, a sort of neutral land, a sort of Switzerland, if you like, in the prehistoric world of Britain. You know, and we're not long settled from being hunter-gatherers to a place where, to a time when we were starting to settle in communities, and so getting that whole community life together was all part of what Stonehenge was about. It was about pulling in groups from all over the area to work on something together. I mean, some different designs. I mean, some people say that Merlin brought the stones there from Ireland. I mean, I think scientifically it's been proven that the blue stones were from Preseli Mountains, and which is a good distance. I mean, you're talking 210 miles, I think those stones were brought all the way, some of them weighing quite colossal weights. Cecil Chubb, who, famed for Chubb locks, etc., locked up Stonehenge in a document called Deed of Gift. He gave Stonehenge to the country. He'd bought it in a auction. The Antrobus family, the big landowners on Salisbury Plain, were having a few hard times. They sold off a large amount of their land, and one of the parcels, they said, contains the ruins of some old temple, and he bought the land, and 6 years later he gave the land to the people. There were various stipulations in the Deed of Gift, such as that a man should never have to pay more than a shilling to see the stones, that no building should be erected within a certain distance of the stones, etc. And basically from that moment onwards, it was at that time it was the Commissioner of Works, the head of the Department of Works, which later became the Environment Department. So the Environment Department, who owned the land, they, like I say, I mean, there were 3,000 people gathered at the solstice of Stonehenge in 1974. I mean, that was quite usual, a big crowd for the solstice. And then Wally managed to talk a lot of people into staying on behind. He'd set up a camp actually in the Stones field. So at some point, I mean, in August, the Department of the Environment came down. And this is how the Wally thing went about, is that everyone that was questioned by the Department of the Environment would give their name as Wally. So I'd be Wally Dean, I've now taken the moniker. So maybe it'd be something invented. There were Wally Egypt, there was Wally Sparkle, there was one of my favourites, Sir Walter What a Wally, also known as Sir Walter What a Big Ship Rally, and all this sort of thing, and quite inventive names and that. But everyone gave the name of Wally because they couldn't press charges against unknown individuals. Everyone came together under the name Wally, brought everyone together in an equality that was, that was meant to embrace all of the people there as one collective. 12 different Wallies went up there, and Chris just smoked continuously through a pantomime mask, quite an ugly, distorted mask. The other Scots Chris was climbing up on lampposts and waving tartan blanket around because he was a member of the Tartan Army, which was similar to a Scottish IRA at the time. We're talking early 70s politics here. This is 1974. And Wally, being the character he was, he'd come bounding out of court, even though they'd lost they'd had an injunction put out against him to say they had to leave the land. He came out and he was like, "Oh, we've won, of course we've won. I mean, we came with love in our hearts. We're playing with the ace of hearts, and that's the only card you'll need." He was sort of saying that they'd won because they'd made friends with the judge. The judge had said he had no doubt they were all good people, but, the argument that Wally called, that he wanted to call God as one of his witnesses, didn't hold up in the courts, and obviously the case was lost. But the camp just moved. There's a fence that runs along the edge of the Stonehenge field, and just the other side of that is still a piece of contested land known as the Drove, which is an old trackway across the plains used by the older farmers to run their stock down to Salisbury, where the big livestock market was. And this track was therefore under a different jurisdiction. It wasn't owned by the the Department of the Environment. It was owned by the Highways Department. So it was a whole different legal fight. And so the Wallies moved just, like I say, it was 20 yards over the fence, and then the whole court process had to be set rolling again.
I gave my heart before they flame. And it's just a box of clay. I don't know who made it there. And it's just a box of clay.
Too many layers.
For your hand. Such a long, long time to be gone, and a short time to be
Even though there'd only been sort of 300 people there, there'd been one band, a band called Zorsch, that played. You know, I mean, it wasn't the stunning lineup of the Beatles and everyone that he'd wanted, but he still regarded it as a victory. You know, they'd all come together, they'd lived together, they'd become the Wallies. You know, he'd had his publicity, he'd had his argument for a freer Albion. He regarded LSD as a sacrament. He said that in court, that that even the judge should try some. He starts advertising, getting the festival posters together for 1975. Roger Hutchinson, who ended up being the editor of International Times, he'd met Wally at Windsor when Wally was promoting the idea of Stonehenge. He'd done the 1975 poster. And so, after being abroad for a bit, he went over to Cyprus for a while, a place he loved. He came back to England in February and started handing out leaflets around London, around Portobello Road, Notting Hill, areas. The gigs up at the Roundhouse were a favourite haunt. He'd go up to the Roundhouse, whatever band was on, be handing out leaflets, talking to people, inviting them all personally to Stonehenge 1975. Now, come May, he's up at Dial House and he fancies he needs a bit of time away in his teepee and a bit of time to get his head together for the cosmic battle honour that was each festival at Stonehenge. And so he started travelling down to the southwest, and as he was passing Amesbury, he went and stayed in the Wallies after moving from Stonehenge, they'd taken a squat, in fact a couple of squats in London Road in Amesbury, and entrenched themselves there, and that was now Wally HQ. He had a very noticeable car. He had a Hillman Husky painted up with rainbows. It had a teepee on top. It was Phil all over the outside of the wagon as much as he was inside, and so it was very noticeable. And during the first night he was there, the police raided the place, said they were looking for a military deserter, because if they say, it's right in the middle of military bases on both sides of Amesbury, etc. But by using the deserter ruse, it meant they could come into the house and search without a search warrant. They say they found acid tabs in his pocket. They would look, you don't look for an army deserter in someone's pocket. Wally was arrested for having 3 tabs of acid and was remanded down to Winchester prison. One thing that stands out is he went onto parade one morning in his pyjamas and said that his prison uniform was making him itch. Well, there's no reason that they should have been making him wear prison uniform. The rules were in that time in the 70s that a remanded prisoner was allowed to wear his civilian clothes until charged. So why he was complaining about a uniform that he didn't need to be wearing, is one question that makes people, think he wasn't being treated properly, etc. So he goes on parade, says that it's making him itch, and he's sent to the prison doctor. Now, the moment he goes into the prison doctor's room, Dr. Scott, the fella's got him. He says, "Well, Wally or Phil, who am I talking to now?" And so straight away he's already got a dual personality picture in his mind. The bloke just sits there and fills in a few forms and says, "You're a schizophrenic." He was taken to the prison hospital where they started treating him with Largactil. He was getting 4 doses of 50 milligrams a day. That was, much more than the daily recommended dose. A largely untested drug as well at the time. Psychiatric chemical treatment was experimenting on patients, basically. After a while, Wally's transferred over to the Old Manor Hospital in Salisbury, which is a proper psychiatric hospital. He's taken back up in front of the judge. He wanted to plead not guilty. He didn't consider the possession of LSD as a crime. I mean, as far as he was concerned, God had told him to take LSD, and God had told him to gather at Stonehenge, and that he was only doing God's work, and that being no higher law than God's law in this country, that no court could hold him accountable. But by the time he's taken to court from Winchester, he's so drugged out on various things. You know, the Largacto is a chemical kosh. It kills your personality and your ability to think. So he's dragged in front of the court again. They section him indefinitely over to the old manor, like I say, in Salisbury. And a strange twist of situations, it turns out that Cecil Chubb, the man who gave away Stonehenge, used to live in the mental hospital where Wally ended up being treated. In a report to the National Council for Civil Liberties, the questionnaire that Wally was given to fill out, they ask him if he was forced to take drugs, and he says, you know, I've got it in his handwriting, yes, you know, he felt he was being forced to take these drugs. That one, it was unavoidable. It was an injectable drug. You know, there's nothing you can do when two burly men are holding you down, pulling your trousers down and injecting you. You know, there's no point fighting, you just end up being damaged. But they also gave him a drug called Chemidrin, which was to fight against the side effects of these injections. And Wally, you know, not knowing which drugs were which, I mean, some people say that he was led to believe that the blue pills were the ones that were making him bad, so he was putting them under his tongue and getting rid of them later. They kept him in until 2 days after the last vehicles had left Stonehenge Festival, and it took him 2 days to get back up to people he knew up in Essex. He describes in some of his writing how he was driving for a short while, and then he'd have to take a break and he'd sort of maybe fall asleep and feel drowsy. He didn't have money to get coffee, so he was basically hopping from one service station to the next service station to get home. He gets back to the house, Dial House, and G and Penny start looking after him. And by this time, he's massively bloated. He's one of the drugs, Weldorm, gives you a photosensitivity. So Phil, the one-time sun worshipper, can hardly go out in the garden now when the sun's shining. He started writing letters to Chris of the TP people, sort of saying, "Oh, I've really got to catch up with you, man. I really want to live in my TP again and feel close to, I might even do a winter in England." He's talking about future plans. He's talking about going up to Wales and staying. He's talking about maybe going to Ibiza. So you can tell he's thinking about his future. And in these letters, he's saying, "Well, when's Watchfield, man?" Basically, Sid Rawle had made a promise with the government that the freaks wouldn't go to sit in the Queen's back garden anymore if the government would find him an alternative site for the People's Free Festival. And the next site he was offered was a World War II airfield in Oxfordshire near Swindon. And so Watchfield was agreed to be the site of the Free Festival in that year, in 1975. And part of the reason they agreed to it is yet again Dick Lee turns up, and his operation staff is still operational, and they've got 350 undercover policemen around the site, making arrests, gathering information, which is, like I say, will eventually the following year lead to the biggest LSD bust ever, Operation Julie. And Wally really wants to go there, and he gets there. He leaves his friends in Devon and drives back up, and they say that he left in good spirits. He was going off to see his tribe. He was going to go and live in his teepee again. He's starting to feel the old Phil again. And so off he goes to Watchfield, and there's a lot of the Wallies there. Mary Wally's there, Jake Wally's there, Chris Wally's there. A lot of his old crowd that he hasn't seen since he was put inside are there. And he's going back to his people. During the festival, on the Sunday of the festival, he gave a talk in one of the teepees at Watchfield. It's a talk that was filmed by John Hoppy Hopkins, who was editor of the International Times at the time. And during this interview, him, Wally Hope and Chris Waite talk about buying land that would be constantly free to the people, that the people could have a permanent festival, a permanent town based around the idea of a festival, which would be theirs. Wally came from an affluent family. His father had died when he was 12, and he had been left a serious estate, which he was going to inherit at 30. I mean, he got a good allowance anyway. He got up to £12 a week, which in early 1970s was a nice amount of money. And so he was coming into enough land to buy this farm that he starts talking about he wants to buy. And there's going to be undercover policemen in this meeting. And so the report will have gone back to the government that there's Wally and he's looking well again. You know, he's starting to look like the old charismatic thorn in the side of the establishment Wally they know. I mean, Tim Wally describes him as a psychedelic anarchist. After Watchfield, Wally returns back to his guardians in the Epping Forest at Ongar, and it sort of seems fairly letters from the doctors that I've recently read sort of say that he was starting to, you know, he's showing all the signs of being the old Wally again. And then on the 3rd of September, Sylvia, the lady doctor, comes back to the house and finds Wally still gasping for air on the floor. Calls an ambulance, starts treating him as well as she can because she's a GP. He's taken off to St Margaret's Hospital in London, but he's pronounced dead on arrival. It all gets a bit complicated here again, because there's Wally, he's dead. He's died, you know, under circumstances that are quite strange. There's things in the house that don't make sense. He's got the telly on, but Wally didn't really watch the telly. The back door's wide open. I mean, you're talking about a doctor's surgery. You know, you don't leave doors open in surgeries. And rather touchingly, one of the things that Sylvia wrote about looking after Wally is that although the house is a surgery, we know that Philip would never go into our cupboards. You know, I mean, he was loved. He was loved in that place. Afterwards, the doctors who were looking after him start, you know, looking into the prescriptions that were issued. There were no prescription issued. Various other letters written by doctors say that he didn't have many drugs on him. The police toxicology labs are obviously doing tests, trying to say why he'd died. And this took 3 months. It ended up with 3 different inquests, and at the first inquest, there's a needle mark which is reported in the coroner's report, and it's on his upper arm up here, and that's one of the things that doesn't make sense to any of the doctors or Phil's friends that are at the inquiry. There's no way that Wally would use needles. So anyway, that becomes a bone of contention, but when that is raised at the second inquest, that's disappeared from the coroner's original report, from the autopsy report. And you know, I mean, this is one of the first mysteries. The police toxicology labs now take 3 months to get back and say that Wally died of a drug which he was prescribed. One of the signs of an overdose of that is that you turn blue, and being found by a GP, she reports no blueness to him. That, you know, he's gagging, but he's not blue. The needle mark, like I say, has disappeared. When people ask why it's disappeared, the defence replies that they have no recollection of it ever being in the records. And basically, in the end, they decide that Wally committed suicide. I mean, it's still disputed by the doctors who found him, and that they contested. They actually applied to the British Medical Association that the doctors in Winchester and then the old manor in Salisbury had literally killed Wally, you know, given him a thing called chronic dyskinesia, which is a communication problem between the brain and the rest of the body caused by massive doses of psychiatric drugs. Interestingly, some of the letters that go around in the months after Wally died is a toxicology expert saying that there'd been quite a few suspicious deaths related to the same drugs that were being, you know, administered to Wally. And that, you know, that really someone should be asking more questions about that. I know that some of Wally's records were sent off to various scientists as part of their, you know, trying to control the use of these drugs, which obviously didn't do Wally any good. He's cremated, before the third inquest, which therefore gets rid of any chance of looking back into whether he had a needle mark on his arm, etc. The Union Wally on the top is the flag that they always flew at Fort Wally. The sun shining out radiantly from the middle of Britain. He loved Britain. I mean, he loved the whole story of Albion, King Arthur. There was an ancient Britain that he wanted to get back in touch with. On the inside I got the Ace of Hearts and the word love. The Ace of Hearts was a card he always said he played with. The Ace of Hearts would win any game. He said we'd always win because we're playing with the Ace of Hearts. So it seemed like fitting that he should. And Wally's box, made by Penny Rambo. He used to make art boxes like this and fill them with sort of shells and that. So when he got Wally's ashes, it sort of seemed the right sort of box. As it says, Wally Hope died 1975, aged 28, a victim of ignorance. Quite a focus point for the whole struggle for Stonehenge, for the freedom of Stonehenge. Here's Wally, and he's still coming to Stonehenge, despite the fact that they killed him, and his ashes are there. The great, many people now through Facebook groups like my own, the Wally Hope Appreciation Society, various Stonehenge groups online. Inside we keep some. I'll show you a few of the things we keep inside. The picture at the bottom there is a picture by Edgar Barclay. It's called Returning Home. That's sealed in a small layer of his ashes under that paper, so that paper won't come out. Inside the box, we keep a number of items. The poem that he loved, The Solstice, a poem by E. Cummings. Thank you, God, for this amazing day, for the leaping, greenly spirits of trees, and the blue true dream of sky, and for everything which is natural, which is yes. I, who have died, am alive again today. This is the sun's birthday. This is the birthday of life and of love and wings, and the gay, great happening, illimitable earth. How should tasting, touching, seeing, breathing, any lifted from the no of all nothing, freedom merely being, doubt, imaginable you. Now the ears of my ears awake, now the eyes of my eyes are opened. If you can, bring your meat, send your love via sun. 20th of June, 1974. He used a couple of poems by E. Cummings. It was obviously a poet that interested him greatly. There's a copy of his 1974 invite to the festival, holding it around that way. A picture of him talking to a crowd of people at Windsor 73. Hope comes from this shirt that his grandmother made him. Eye of Horus and a pyramid with the sun shining out over the top through the words hope. That's how he got the surname Hope. This here's Shroud of Turin. Wally carried, this is actually a photocopy of the piece of paper that Wally carried in his pocket all the time. He had quite a religious trip. He imagined he'd met he knew that he'd met an 11-year-old reincarnation of Jesus while he was in Cyprus. He often said that the reason he stayed at Stonehenge was because that was what God ordered, and that that God had the highest law in the country, and that no court could tell God what to do. And I've also got a copy of the letter that Wally sent to the farmer who ran the land around Stonehenge. And I've always thought this was a rather lovely letter, that it sums up Wally quite well. On the road home Sunday. Dear Sir, with all well-meaning respect, our Lord God and his Son Jesus Christ have ordained a spiritual pilgrimage to Stonehenge on the 20th of June and the 21st to fulfill the 2 commandments: love God and love your neighbour. You are and will be our neighbour. We beg of you for help, friendship and trust. If the gathering is overflowing big, we will give you any help you need, but you must respect we are to God's law, and trying to balance the violence, compassion, ensuing Third World War, oily energy crisis, to manual communal farming, love, peace and freedom. I'm your best mate, Wally. We're doing this for the kids. And he had a naivety to him that was quite beautiful. He knew that if he said that he came with love, that that should be how he was treated back. I'm trying to get his book published at the moment. Wally was working on a book called Windsor Rocks, which is all about how he believed that a communal living Britain, based on different values to the ones which our state was based on, it came through in things like Sid Rawls' Voices of Albion, the Albion Free State Manifesto. Ubi Dwyer talked a lot about, the Albion Free State, about how the land had been stolen from the people by the rich. See, I mean, this is part of the reason he was seen as a threat, he wanted to turn the land back to the people, and he had enough money to buy the land. He could have set up his Eden in his New Jerusalem, and the state had to stop him, really. Wally Hope. We're all Wally, all of us, and every day is a Sunday.